The letter Keanu never meant to send. It began with a letter no one was supposed to read. The morning light slid through the thin white curtains of Sandra's home, touching the wooden table where a sealed envelope rested. Her name was written on it in quiet handwriting, the kind that looked unsure, as if every stroke carried hesitation. It had arrived 3 days ago without a sender's name, but she recognized the way the ink curved around her name. She had seen that handwriting before. Years ago, on a film set, on a birthday card, on a note left beside a cup of coffee. It was Keanu's. She hadn't opened it yet. She couldn't. Every time her fingers brushed the paper, a wave of memories rose inside her like a tide that refused to stay calm. In those moments, she remembered the laughter that used to fill the space between takes, his quiet kindness when everyone else was too busy, and how he always listened when no one else did. She remembered how, during one late-night shoot under the rain, Keanu had turned to her and said something she never forgot. Kindness doesn't need a reason. It just needs courage. She had carried that line for years. And now, that same man, the one who taught her calmness through silence, had sent her a letter, a final one. She finally tore the envelope open. The paper inside was folded twice, edges soft from being touched many times. The first line made her heart stop. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in person." Her fingers trembled. She read on. "There's something I've hidden for years, not because I was afraid of you, but because I was afraid of what it would change. You were always more than a co-star, more than a friend. You were the piece I never learned to keep." The words blurred. Her chest felt heavy, like her heart was learning how to breathe again. She reached the next line. "I wanted to visit one last time, before the world forgets the sound of our laughter. I don't know when that will be. But when I come, you'll know it's me." She lowered the letter. For a long time, she didn't move. She could hear only the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the echo of her own heartbeat. Keanu's words didn't sound like a goodbye. They sounded like a promise, one he never got to keep. Later that day, she received a call from a mutual friend, someone who had worked with Keanu recently. The tone on the other end was gentle but heavy. Sandra already knew before the words were said. "He's gone," the voice whispered. "Keanu passed peacefully last week." The phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Everything after that moment blurred. Voices, condolences, reporters, the sudden rush of the world demanding statements and reactions. But Sandra didn't say anything. She didn't post. She didn't appear in public. She simply disappeared into silence. For days, she stayed in her home, rereading the letter. Each time, new tears fell, not because of loss alone, but because she felt something unfinished, a story left mid-sentence, a question unanswered. She remembered the last time they met. It was at a quiet cafe near Sunset Boulevard. He was sitting alone, reading. When she arrived, he smiled that calm half-smile that never forced attention. They spoke for hours about nothing and everything, about films, about solitude, about how fame felt like noise and silence was the only real luxury. Before leaving, he had said, "If we ever lose touch, just look for silence. I'll be there." Now that silence had returned, only heavier, deeper, almost sacred. But the next morning, something strange happened. She woke up to the faint sound of her front gate creaking open. She thought it was the wind. When she looked through the window, there was no one there, only a small potted plant on her doorstep. Lavender, the same kind Keanu once gifted her on her birthday. A small tag hung from it. Her breath caught when she read it. For peace. K. She sank to her knees, the letter still in her hand. Her mind raced. Was this arranged before he passed? Had someone delivered it late? Or was this his final message, left in a way only he could? She decided to find out. The rest of that day turned into a quiet investigation. She called the florist they both used, but the store owner said they hadn't had an order from Keanu in months. She checked her gate camera, but the screen flickered with static at the exact moment the plant appeared. No face, no figure, nothing. Only silence again. That night, she sat in her living room, holding the lavender close. She spoke softly, as if he could hear her through the quiet. Keanu, if this is your way of saying goodbye, you didn't have to. You never really left. The next morning, something else arrived. This time, a small package wrapped in brown paper. No return address, just a faint scent of old books and cedar wood. Inside was a vintage notebook, the kind Keanu always carried. On the first page was his handwriting again. Truth doesn't end when words stop. Sometimes it waits. She turned the next page and froze. It was filled with letters, pages written to her over the years, never sent. Moments he captured in words instead of conversations. She read each line like rediscovering time itself. He wrote about their first movie, how her laughter made him forget exhaustion, how her kindness softened the edges of his loneliness. He wrote about her quiet strength, how she faced the world with grace even when it hurt. And between the lines there was something else, something that wasn't said but always felt. He loved her. But love to Keanu had never been about possession. It was about presence. He never asked for her to stay. He only wanted her to know that she mattered, that her light had reached places he didn't even realize were dark. By midnight, Sandra had read every page. She closed the notebook and whispered through the dark, "You waited all this time to tell me?" As if in response, a gust of wind moved through the open window, carrying the faint scent of lavender across the room. She smiled through her tears. But what she didn't know was that one final truth still waited to be uncovered, something he had arranged before his passing. A visit no one expected. And it was coming the next day. The secret visit the next morning, Sandra woke to the sound of footsteps on her porch. She wasn't expecting anyone. The world outside was still quiet, painted in the soft blue of early dawn. Her heart beat faster, unsure whether it was fear, hope, or something in between. She opened the door slowly. No one stood there. Only the morning air and a small parcel wrapped in black paper, resting neatly beside the lavender pot. Attached to it was a folded note. The note read, "This was meant for you. He wanted you to have it after he was gone." There was no name, only the faint impression of a fingerprint smudged near the corner. She carried it inside and placed it on the table next to Keanu's notebook. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. Inside was a USB drive and an old Polaroid picture, the two of them laughing on a film set years ago, both drenched in fake rain, eyes closed, faces alive. The photo looked like time had forgotten to move forward. Beneath it, another line was scribbled in his handwriting. "When you see this, remember what we promised." She didn't remember any specific promise, at least not one they ever said out loud. Maybe it was something only he understood. With shaking fingers, she connected the USB to her laptop. A single video file appeared. For Sandra MP4. Her breath caught. She pressed play. Keanu's face appeared on the screen. His hair longer than before, streaked with silver, eyes calm but filled with weight. He sat in what looked like his home studio. Behind him, shelves of books and a single dim lamp glowed. He smiled, that quiet, humble smile that never tried to impress. "Hey, Sandy," he began softly, his voice as gentle as she remembered. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't get to come see you myself. I wanted to. I tried." His tone stayed light, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, the silent truth that time had caught up with him. "You always told me I hide too much," he continued. "You were right. I've spent my life giving pieces of myself away. To strangers, to characters, to the world. But I never knew how to keep anything for me. Except you. Sandra pressed her palm over her mouth, trying not to cry. He looked down for a moment, then smiled again. Do you remember that day we wrapped the first movie? You said, "One day, when we're older, we'll look back and laugh at how much we didn't say." Well, this is that day. I don't want to leave without saying it. He took a deep breath. You changed my life, not with words, but with the way you treated people. When the world wanted me to be someone else, you reminded me who I was. I guess that's love, right? Not loud, not perfect, just peaceful. He paused, eyes glancing toward something off-screen. I wanted to see you one last time. Maybe I still will. Maybe in a way you won't expect. He gave a small laugh, then added softly, If I could ask you one thing, it would be this. Keep the promise. The video faded to black. For a long while, Sandra sat frozen, staring at the blank screen. The silence in the room felt heavy, alive. She whispered into the stillness. What promise, Keanu? The lavender scent drifted again through the window. Faint but distinct, as if answering her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed memories in her mind like scenes from an unfinished film. His laughter, his quiet gestures, the way he always looked away when emotions grew too strong. She wondered if she had missed the meaning behind something long ago. Then she remembered. Years earlier, during a night shoot for a film that never got finished, they had sat together on the hood of a car under a sky full of stars. They talked about how fame felt empty and how they wanted their lives to mean something when the cameras stopped. She had said, If we ever forget who we are, promise me we'll find our way back to truth. He had smiled then, touching her shoulder gently. I promise, he had said, and you promise too. And now, through the years and silence he was reminding her, she realized what she had to do. 2 days later, Sandra flew to Toronto, Keanu's hometown. She hadn't been there in years. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of pine and rain. She visited the small cafe he used to go to, the one that still had a corner seat reserved for him. The waitress recognized her instantly but said nothing. She only placed a cup of coffee in front of her and whispered, He came here often, said it helped him think. Sandra nodded. Did he ever mention a message? The waitress hesitated. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. He left this. Said a friend would come one day and I'd know who it was. Her heart raced as she took it. The handwriting was his again. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single line. When you reach the lake, you'll understand. She stared at the words for a long moment. The only lake he ever talked about was Lake Ontario, the place he went when he wanted to be alone. The next morning, she drove there. Mist floated above the water like breath. The wind carried the soft sound of waves hitting the shore. She walked slowly to the bench overlooking the lake. And then she froze. Someone had placed another small lavender pot on the bench. Attached was a piece of paper with 3 words written in black ink. You kept it. Her eyes filled with tears. She sat down, holding the plant close, and whispered, Yes, Keanu, I did. In that moment, she didn't feel alone. The lake seemed to move with quiet understanding, the wind whispering through the leaves like a familiar voice. But just as she was about to leave, she noticed something else carved faintly into the wooden bench. 3 initials inside a circle, K+S+ forever. She touched it gently, and a realization washed over her. He had been there, maybe not long before he passed. He had carved it himself, knowing she would find it one day. As the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the lake in gold, Sandra felt something shift inside her. Grief became gratitude, loss became connection, but as she turned to leave, she noticed a man standing in the distance, tall, wearing a black coat, his posture calm, familiar. For a second, she couldn't move. The man stood perfectly still, facing the water. Then, without turning around, he raised his hand and waved once. Slow, deliberate. Sandra blinked through tears. But when she looked again, the man was gone. Only footprints in the sand remained. The shadow by the lake that night. Sandra couldn't sleep. The image of that man by the lake kept replaying in her mind. Tall, still, silent. She told herself it couldn't be him. It was impossible. Yet her heart refused to agree with her mind. Something inside whispered, it was him, in his own way. She sat by the window of her small Toronto apartment, staring at the reflection of the streetlights. Everything outside was calm, but inside her, memories stirred like waves in a storm. The letters, the video, the lavender pots. It all felt like part of a message she hadn't yet fully understood. She reopened the last page of Keanu's notebook, tracing the final words he had written. Truth doesn't end when words stop. Sometimes it waits, she whispered to herself. Waits for what? The next morning, she decided to visit someone who might know more. Keanu's old friend, Marcus, a musician he had known since his early acting days. Marcus had been quiet since the funeral, avoiding interviews and the noise of public attention. Sandra called him, and after a long pause on the line, he said softly, "Come by. There's something you should see." When she arrived, Marcus greeted her with a kind but weary smile. His home smelled of coffee and pine wood. Photos of old concerts, road trips, and candid moments filled the walls. In almost all of them, Keanu was there, laughing, holding a guitar, or simply listening in that peaceful way only he could. They sat together at the kitchen table. The morning light fell between them like a bridge built of silence. "He left something with me," Marcus said finally, reaching into a drawer. "Told me not to open it unless you came looking." It was another letter. The envelope was faintly scented with lavender. Sandra took a deep breath and opened it. "Dear Sandy, if you're reading this, it means you followed the trail. I always knew you would. I wanted to leave behind something more than memories. There's a recording I made years ago. Not a movie, not an interview, something real. Find it in the cabin near Lake Ontario. You'll know which one. It's where we watched the sunset and talked about freedom. The truth is there." Beneath his signature, there was a small drawing, a sun dipping below the waterline, a single ray stretching toward the shore. Her mind went back to that exact place. Years ago, during a short break between films, they had driven out to a small wooden cabin by the water. It wasn't luxurious, just a single room, a fireplace, and an old record player. She remembered how he said it was his favorite place because nothing there pretends to be more than it is. She thanked Marcus, her eyes glassy with emotion. As she was leaving, he stopped her and said, "Sandra, he talked about you often. Not like people talk about someone they once loved, but like someone who never stopped." She nodded quietly, unable to speak. The road to the cabin was long and narrow, lined with trees that whispered with the wind. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. As she reached the old gate, she saw it, still standing after all those years, though covered with moss and time. Inside, the cabin looked almost untouched. Dust floated in the sunlight that slipped through the window. The furniture was simple. A wooden chair, a small table, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. On the table sat a small metal box. Her pulse quickened. She opened it slowly. Inside was an old cassette tape labeled in his handwriting, "Truth." There was also a folded note. "Play it when the world is quiet." Sandra looked around. The only sound was the gentle tapping of rain on the roof. She placed the cassette into the player and pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then his voice emerged, soft, calm, and deeply human. "If you're hearing this, it means I've said goodbye the only way I knew how. I didn't want to leave the world without gratitude. I've spent a life searching for meaning, and I found it not in fame or noise, but in connection. You, Sandy, taught me that." His voice cracked slightly, as though he had paused to breathe through emotion. "The truth is, I was sick for a long time. I didn't tell many people. I didn't want pity. I wanted peace. I wanted my last days to be filled with light, not questions. So I made this recording not as a farewell, but as a gift. A reminder that kindness outlives the body." Tears streamed down her face as she listened. "People will talk. They'll make stories. They'll guess. But only you know who I really was. You saw through the quiet. You understood without asking. That was our truth. He paused, and the soft sound of waves played in the background, as if he had recorded it by the lake. When you stand by the water, you'll see me there. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as stillness. And if you smile, I'll know you kept your promise. The tape clicked off. For a long time, Sandra sat on the floor crying quietly. The room felt alive, filled not with sadness, but with warmth. She realized then that his final visit wasn't physical. It was spiritual, through gestures, letters, and the spaces between silence. As she prepared to leave, a soft light fell across the table. Something glittered faintly between the floorboards. She bent down and found a small silver locket. Inside, it was a photo of them from that same day at the lake, smiling, unaware that time would one day turn the moment into legend. Beneath the photo, a tiny inscription read, "Truth kept." "Love quiet." She held it tightly in her hand and whispered, "I hear you, Keanu. I kept the promise." But as she turned toward the window, something strange caught her eye. Fresh footprints leading away from the cabin door toward the water. She hadn't noticed them before. The rain had stopped only minutes ago, and yet those prints were clear. Recent, too defined to belong to anyone from before. She stepped outside, following them until they disappeared near the edge of the lake. The water was calm, golden with the setting sun. For a brief second, she saw a reflection, a man standing beside her, smiling gently. She blinked, and he was gone. Only the wind remained, carrying his voice through the rustling leaves. "Thank you for finding me." Sandra closed her eyes and whispered, "I never lost you." The water shimmered in response, a wave of peace spreading across the surface, as if the truth itself had finally exhaled. But what she didn't know was that one last message still waited, one that would change everything she believed about his final days. The message he left behind the next morning. Sandra woke to the faint light of dawn slipping through the cabin window. The lake outside was calm again, almost too calm, as if holding a secret beneath its still surface. She sat for a long time on the wooden floor, holding the locket in her hand. Her eyes were red, but her heart felt strangely light. Not because the pain was gone, but because she finally understood part of his silence. But something inside her kept whispering, "There's more." Before leaving, she took one last look around the cabin. The smell of wood and rain lingered. She ran her fingers across the old bookshelf, tracing the edges of worn spines. Her hand stopped when she touched a familiar one, a thin black notebook tucked behind a stack of scripts. It looked newer than the rest. She opened it. Inside, on the first page, was his handwriting again. "If you found this, it means you followed the silence instead of the noise. Good. You were always the only one who could." Her pulse quickened. She turned the page. "By the time you read this, people will already be telling my story, in ways I never meant for them to. Don't believe everything. I left something unfinished, and you're the only one who can decide whether to share it or let it rest." She frowned. Unfinished? What could he mean? The next line gave her the answer. "Inside the floorboard, under the old table, you'll find a key. It belongs to my private locker in Los Angeles. It holds the film I never released, the one I made for you." Her heart froze. She had heard rumors about a secret short film Keanu shot years ago. Something deeply personal that he never showed anyone. People called it the quiet side. No one knew if it even existed. She stood and rushed to the table. The floor creaked softly under her feet. Kneeling down, she pressed her fingers against the edges of the board. One corner lifted slightly. She pried it open, and there, hidden beneath layers of dust, lay a small silver key. Tied to it was a tag that read Storage 19. She held it tightly, her breath trembling. The weight of it felt unreal, like holding the last piece of his soul. 2 days later, she was back in Los Angeles. The city felt louder than ever. Billboards, lights, and cameras everywhere reminded her of how different their worlds had become. Yet somehow, how they had always stayed connected beyond all that noise. She drove to a small storage facility on the edge of the city. The air smelled of metal and old rain. Locker 19 was near the back, its door covered in dust and faint scratches. She inserted the key, and it turned with a soft click. Inside was a single black box labeled The Quiet Side. She lifted it carefully and opened it. A hard drive, a small envelope, and another note. You once said real art is what we never show. Maybe you were right. But maybe it's time. She opened the envelope. There was a photograph. Keanu standing by a projector, looking directly into the lens, smiling faintly. Behind him, on the wall, was a single frame from the unreleased film, a blurred image of her, laughing on a movie set years ago. Below the picture, he had written, "This film is not about me. It's about what you taught me. That even quiet hearts can change the world." She took the hard drive home. It took hours to gather the courage to play it. When she finally did, the screen flickered to life with a simple message. For Sandra. Then the film began. The first scene was black and white footage of random strangers, people laughing in cafes, helping each other, smiling at pets, holding doors open, offering kindness in small ways. Keanu's voice narrated softly over the images. "People think strength is loud," he said, "but sometimes it's quiet. It's in the moments no one sees, the ones that never go viral. The quiet side of love is the part that doesn't need to be noticed to be real." The next scene showed him sitting alone at a park bench, the same bench from the photo, the one by Lake Ontario. He looked older, slower, but peaceful. "If I've learned anything," he continued, "it's that love doesn't vanish when people do. It lingers, it guides, it changes us. Maybe that's what eternity really means." Then the camera slowly turned, revealing a shadow moving behind the lens. Her. It was a candid shot from years ago. She must have walked into the frame by accident during one of their breaks. He kept it. He had built the entire film around that one moment, her unguarded laughter, her real joy. The final words of his narration came softly, like a whisper through time. "If you're watching this, Sandy, know that I found peace, and I hope you do too. Don't mourn me. Finish what we started. Tell stories that heal. Remind people that gentleness is power." The screen faded to black. Sandra sat frozen, tears falling freely. She realized then what he meant by unfinished. This film wasn't meant for fame or festivals. It was a legacy. A message of empathy and quiet strength meant to outlive both of them. She spent the following week restoring the footage, cleaning the sound, and preparing it to share. She decided to release it online, not as a movie, but as a message titled The Quiet Side, a tribute to Keanu Reeves. When it finally went live, the response was overwhelming. Millions watched, millions cried, and countless people began sharing small acts of kindness in his name. But while the world wept, Sandra stayed quiet. She didn't do interviews. She didn't post statements. She simply watched the ripple of goodness spread. Then one night, a message appeared on her phone. No sender ID, no number. Just one sentence. "Thank you for keeping the promise." She froze. Her hands shook. She tried calling back, but the line was dead. The next morning, she went to the studio to check the servers where the film had been uploaded. The technician there looked puzzled. "Something weird happened last night," he said. "Someone logged in remotely for a few minutes. Same access key as yours, but it came from an untraceable location. They only changed one thing, the video description." Sandra frowned and opened the page. The description now read, "In memory of silence, in gratitude for love. K." She stared at the screen for a long time. Tears welled again, not from sadness this time, but from awe. Somehow, even now, he was still finding ways to speak. But she didn't yet know that one last surprise remained. Something Keanu had arranged years earlier that would make their story complete and change how the world remembered them both. The truth that waited in silence. 2 weeks passed since the release of The Quiet Side. The world had fallen in love with it, not because it was cinematic or polished, but because it was real. People wrote messages like, "This changed how I see kindness," and "He made silence speak louder than fame." Every headline spoke about Keanu's humility, his hidden wisdom, his message of quiet strength. But for Sandra, the days that followed felt different. She was proud, but something kept her awake at night. It was that final text. Thank you for keeping the promise. It came from nowhere, left no trace, but it felt too personal to dismiss as coincidence. One evening, she sat alone on her porch. The sun was fading, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of his favorite phrase, "Light that forgives." She whispered softly into the air, "If that was really you, I still have questions." The wind stirred gently, as if listening. The next morning, her assistant brought a letter. No postage, no courier tag. Just her name written neatly on the front, Sandra. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words inside mentioned Keanu. "Miss Bullock, my name is Dr. Elaine Porter. I was part of a hospice care team that looked after Mr. Reeves in his final weeks. He often spoke of you. Before he passed, he gave me something to deliver to you when the time felt right. I think that time is now." The letter ended with an address, a small private hospice facility just outside Vancouver. Within hours, Sandra was on a flight. When she arrived, Dr. Porter greeted her with soft eyes and a steady calm. "He didn't want the world to know," the doctor said as they walked through the garden. "He asked us to promise privacy. Said he wanted to live his last days quietly without fear or sympathy. He spent most of his time writing, listening to music, and looking at the sky." They reached a small stone bench under an old tree. Dr. Porter handed her a brown folder tied with a ribbon. "He said you'd understand this better than anyone." Inside was a handwritten letter and a small USB drive. The letter read, "Sandy, if you're reading this, it means you finally saw what I wanted you to. The peace I found in silence. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you with my ending, but you were part of my calm, and you deserve the truth. There's something I couldn't finish. A project called The Mirror Room. It was supposed to be about forgiveness, not just between people, but with ourselves. I filmed part of it here, in this hospice, with the people who reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. I want you to finish it. The USB has everything, footage, notes, voiceovers. But the final scene is yours to write. Make it honest. Make it yours." The rest of the letter trailed off into a few final words. "If we ever meet again, let it be in silence, because silence is where love hides when words are done." Sandra closed her eyes, pressing the paper against her chest. Tears ran freely, not from pain, but from the quiet grace of his goodbye. That night, in her hotel room, she opened the USB drive. Inside were dozens of short clips, interviews with nurses, janitors, and other patients. Keanu was behind the camera, his voice gentle and curious. In one video, he asked a man named Josh, "What does peace mean to you?" The man smiled faintly. "Peace is when you stop fighting the past and start forgiving it." In another, he spoke to a nurse named Clara. "What's the kindest thing anyone ever did for you?" She laughed softly. "You brought me coffee on my first day here. Does that count?" Keanu chuckled in the background. Kindness counts twice when no one expects it. Each video was filled with laughter, tears, and moments of raw humanity. It was unlike anything he had ever filmed, unedited truth, and then came the final clip. He turned the camera on himself. His hair was thinner, his face calm but pale, yet his eyes still carried that light, soft, unwavering. "This project isn't about death," he said quietly. "It's about what stays after it. I believe every act of goodness echoes somewhere, even if no one sees it. And if that's true, then none of us ever really disappear." He paused, looking straight into the lens. "Sandy, if you ever finish this, tell them it wasn't goodbye. Tell them it was gratitude." The clip ended with him smiling faintly, whispering something so soft that she almost missed it. "I'll see you in the quiet." She sat there for hours, replaying that line. "I'll see you in the quiet." It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It was a promise, one he kept sending her through every silence. A few months later, she completed The Mirror Room. It was simple, raw, and deeply human, half documentary, half reflection. She used Keanu's original footage and added her own narration. Her voice in the film was soft but steady. He once said that silence has a sound. You just have to listen differently. Maybe that's true. Maybe peace isn't the absence of noise, but the acceptance of it. The film premiered online, free for everyone. Millions watched again. Messages flooded in from around the world, people forgiving, reconciling, healing, but the night after the release, something happened that made her believe the impossible once more. She was in her living room, surrounded by soft candlelight, when her lights flickered once. The TV screen turned on by itself. The image that appeared wasn't a show, not even a video, just a still picture. It was the lake. The same one from Toronto. The water shimmered gently, and in the distance a faint silhouette stood near the bench, tall, calm, and still. She whispered through her tears, "Keanu." The figure didn't move, but the reflection on the water seemed to smile. Then the screen went dark again. She didn't try to explain it. She didn't tell anyone. She simply whispered, "I'll see you in the quiet." And for the first time in months, she slept peacefully, but fate still held one final revelation, something she would discover not long after, hidden deep in the past, showing her that Keanu's last gift had started long before she ever knew it existed. The final visit, months passed. The seasons changed quietly, as if the world itself was honoring a promise of stillness. The waves of public emotion around the mirror room had softened. People had stopped crying and started reflecting. Everywhere, strangers were speaking more gently, forgiving a little faster, loving a little deeper. And Sandra, she had changed too. Her days were slower now, calmer, filled with a strange peace she couldn't quite name. Yet deep inside her, something still lingered, not sadness, but a feeling that the story wasn't over. One evening, while going through old storage boxes in her studio, she found a small, unlabeled envelope. It must have been buried there for years. She almost threw it away, but curiosity made her open it. Inside was a folded note, a photograph, and an old key. The photograph stopped her breath. It was from decades ago, her and Keanu sitting side by side on a movie set, holding paper cups of coffee, smiling at something off camera. Someone had written a small word on the back in faded ink. Home. Beneath it, the note read, "If you ever forget what peace feels like, come back to where it began." The key was old and small, with a tag that simply said Studio 4. Her heart tightened. Studio 4 was the sound stage where she and Keanu had filmed one of their first scenes together, the movie that made them both stars, and where their friendship quietly began. The building had been abandoned for years now, turned into a museum for classic films. The next morning, she drove there alone. When she arrived, the gatekeeper looked surprised to see her. "It's been closed for a long time," he said. "No one comes here anymore?" She showed him the key. His eyes widened. "That key belongs to the old editing suite. I didn't even know it still existed." He unlocked the main doors for her, and she stepped into the dim, dusty air of the past. Shafts of sunlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating floating dust like memories caught mid-air. Her footsteps echoed softly against the floor. She followed the faded signs until she reached a small door marked Studio 4, Private. She inserted the key, and it turned easily, as if time itself had been waiting for her. The room inside was small and quiet. Old editing equipment lined the walls. Film reels, scripts, and camera notes were stacked neatly in the corners. And in the center of the room stood a single chair, facing a projector. On the chair sat a sealed film canister labeled, "For Sandra." Her hands trembled as she lifted it. She placed the reel into the projector and turned the switch. The machine hummed to life, its light flickering onto the wall. The screen came alive with grainy black and white footage. It was Keanu sitting at a piano, the same one he used in his home studio years ago. He wasn't acting. He wasn't performing. He was just being himself. Quiet, thoughtful, real. He looked up at the camera and smiled gently. "Hey, Sandy," he said softly. "I recorded this a long time ago, back when we still thought we had all the time in the world." His voice was calm, steady, full of that same warmth she remembered. "You once asked me what I'd do if I could leave one message behind," he continued. "I didn't have an answer then, but now I think I do." He paused, his fingers resting lightly on the piano keys. "If I could leave anything behind, it wouldn't be fame or awards or even films. It would be a reminder that kindness outlives everything, that silence can heal, That love, the quiet kind, doesn't need to be declared to be real. He pressed a few soft notes on the piano, a melody she recognized instantly. It was the same tune he had played for her once on set, years ago between takes. "You told me once that home isn't a place, it's a feeling," he said. "And you were right. You've been home to many people, including me. So if you ever come back here to this room, know that you never really left mine." He smiled again, that same gentle smile that always said more than words could. Then he added quietly, "When my time comes, don't remember me as someone who left. Remember me as someone who stayed in every silence." The film flickered, then faded to black. Sandra sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. She didn't sob. She simply breathed deeply, letting the silence around her fill with his presence. It felt as though the walls themselves remembered his laughter, his kindness, his stillness. And then something happened. The projector, though turned off, continued to hum faintly. She frowned and looked back. The film reel had stopped spinning, but the light from the lens flickered again. Only this time, it wasn't projecting an image from the film. It was showing a live reflection. On the wall, her own silhouette appeared, sitting alone, watching, and beside her, faint but unmistakable, was another figure. Tall, still, calm. He was sitting next to her. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She only whispered, "You kept your promise." The figure turned its head slightly toward her, as if nodding, and then, just as gently, it faded with the light. The projector went silent. Sandra sat there for a long time, her hand resting on the chair beside her, feeling warmth in the air where he had been. The silence around her wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, like music that only hearts could hear. She whispered softly, "Good night, Keanu." Outside, the morning sun began to rise. Its light spilled through the cracks in the old studio walls, turning the dust into tiny golden stars. And as she stepped outside, she saw something resting on the ground near her car. A small lavender flower, fresh, untouched, perfectly still in the soft wind. She smiled, lifted it gently, and placed it close to her heart. "I know," she said softly. "You never really left." And with that, she walked away. Not as someone mourning a loss, but as someone carrying peace, because now she understood. His final visit wasn't about coming back. It was about reminding her that love never really goes anywhere. It simply changes its form, from laughter to silence, from presence to memory, from life to light. And as the sun rose higher, the world seemed to whisper back the truth she had finally learned, that real love doesn't end. It only becomes eternal in the quiet.